the Szabo cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
It has been a hot minute since we've talked about the ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign that is Israel's genocide of Palestine. And speaking of a hot minute, I should let you know that I have an air conditioner going right now because it is extremely hot over where I live, and I'm not turning that AC off anytime soon. But it made me begin to think about people in Rafah and the West Bank being imperialized, having their homes burned down, with Zionist settler attacks on villages, with endless bombs on encampments. I just can't imagine with the horrific conditions in which Palestinians have to live under must be completely exacerbated with this growing heat, as this is, of course, you guessed it, the hottest summer we've ever had, and it's only going to get hotter in the upcoming years. And with this ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign and the United States fueling of the war machine that is the IDF, this is contributing to a wider problem that is ecocide. Not just remotely to Gaza and the West Bank, but it ripples throughout the entire world. As according to the Carbon Majors report, 100 companies, including ExxonMobil, Shell, British Petroleum, and Chevron, contribute to 71% of our global emissions. Paper straws be damned, and keeping in mind that these are all oil companies fueling major wars like this ethnic cleansing campaign. Anyway, the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is not necessarily to summarize the ongoing genocide, although it is to give the context as to what I'm about to discuss with you, which is a statement issued by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of so-called Israel. Yes, this entire podcast episode, it's going to be about a statement that Benjamin Netanyahu has made. I wasn't planning on making an episode today, but what he said was so fucking outrageous, so absolutely absurd that I had to say something about it. Alright, I'm going to play the clip in full, and then we're going to talk about it. Take a listen.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Yeah, isn't that wild? How dare you withhold weapons? You've been, completely supporting us in our genocidal fucking tirade unconditionally since October 7th. You've been completely disregarding your own voters' demands for a ceasefire, with multiple protests happening all over the country. No, fuck that. All over the fucking world. Even in Washington, D.C., as recent as June 8th, where protesters demanded that Joe Biden draw a red line. Some kind of fucking boundary. Some kind of fucking standard. Some kind of, nope, this is way too far, we're not giving you any fucking weapons. And they still do. According to CNBC News in an article published May 14, 2024, Biden still sent $1 billion in more weapons ammo to Israel, which resulted in the bombing of the tent camp in Rafah on May 27th. So I don't know. I think the first response I had to Benjamin Netanyahu complaining that they were withholding weapons so they could do more ethnic genocidal campaigns was, how fucking dare you? Like, don't get me wrong, I am not a Biden supporter. I don't like Biden. He obviously lost my vote for this election. He's lost my vote a long time ago. Let's just be real here. It's not like I'm, looking at Benjamin Netanyahu as someone who betrayed Biden and I am disheartened by it. I am obviously disheartened that Biden completely screwed over his voters, predictably so, as the Democratic Party has routinely, for decades now, disregarded and disrespected the demands of its voters. So I'm not really surprised necessarily, but it's really the brazen fucking, hey, why would you withhold weapons? How dare you withhold weapons from us? It's the specific attitude that Benjamin Netanyahu gives to Biden and his administration for, withholding weapons. It comes off specifically as really fucking entitled. So entitled. You know what I mean? That is just a really fucking unfounded performance of bitching, moaning, and complaining. It's one of those things, too, where I just don't know if even in my edgy fucking mind, if I could think up of new kinds of war crimes for the IDF to commit. As I've talked about in the past with British Colonel Richard Kemp, has referred to the IDF as the world's most moral army.
There are two views of the Israeli military, what you hear in most of the media and the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. I was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. I have fought in combat zones around the world, including Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Macedonia and Iraq. I was also present throughout the conflict in Gaza in 2014. Based on my experience and on my observations, the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, does more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare.
This man literally claims that he was there during the 2014 Gaza war, followed by praising the IDF, saying that they safeguard the rights of civilians. Well, I don't know about that. Let's look at statistics. These numbers are coming from AP News, but it was reported by the UN, so the UN is the primary source in this case. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to read part of the article verbatim. Quote, in all cases, the UN counts have largely been consistent with the Gaza Health Ministry, with small discrepancy. 2008 war. The ministry reported 1440 Palestinians killed. The UN reported 1385. 2014 war. The ministry reported 2,310 Palestinians killed. The UN reported 2,251. 2021 war, the ministry reported 260 Palestinians killed. The UN reported 256. The article goes on to say, while Israel and Palestinians disagree over the numbers of militants versus civilians killed in past wars, Israel's account of Palestinian casualties have come close to the Gaza ministries. For instance, Israel's foreign ministry said the 2014 war killed 2,125 Palestinians, just a bit lower than the ministry's toll. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel has killed, quote, thousands, end quote, of militants in the current war, without offering evidence or precise numbers. Alright, I'm done reading from AP News. My response is that this is what the British Colonel Dick Kemp means when the IDF is the most moral army. Yeah, to make my point, I'm going to continue this podcast episode by responding to British Colonel Dick Kemp's PragerU video, which, by the way, was actually shared on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Twitter account. So we all are fully aware of where the bias of this appeal is coming from. So let us continue from where we left off, because he's about to explain why the IDF is the most moral army in the world.
Why is this so? Firstly, Israel is a decent country with Western values run on democratic principles. Israel has no more interest in war than Belgium does. In fact, Israel has never started a war. The only reason it ever goes to war is to defend itself. And it has to defend itself because, unlike Belgium, it is surrounded by countries and armed groups that want to destroy it.
This is an attempt to establish some kind of legitimacy for Israel to even be aggressive in the first place. It's trying to paint Israel as a defensive nation state, when really it truly is not. British Colonel Dick Kemp is relying on you to not know what the Nakba is, or what the Naksa is. And for the sake of brevity, I would encourage you all to go Google that yourself. But for the sake of being thorough, I will explain that these instances that took place in 1948 and 1967, respectively, are a small segment of a large continuation of Israel's expansion and ethnic cleansing campaign. Does that sound familiar? Because yes, what is going on now in 2023 and 2024, respectively, is a continuation of both of those events. This sentiment in which I am discussing here is not a unique idea, but it has actually been expressed by the United Nations themselves in an article published in May of 2024. The chair of the United Nations Committee said, quote, "Today we again commemorate the events of 1948 and subsequent years, which led to the disposition and displacement of approximately 750,000 Palestinians from their ancestral homelands." End quote. He goes on to say, in response to the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, quote, "The Israeli response was and continues to be disproportionate and indiscriminate." And he goes on to say that breaches of norms by one group do not excuse breaches of international law and norms by another. And he finally goes on to conclude, "The Nakba, thus, is an ongoing process affecting the Palestinian people over generations." So this assertion that Dick Kemp is making, that Israel has never engaged in some kind of colonial aggression towards the Palestinians, is absolutely absurd, and if I'm being quite frank with you, it's an outright lie. Let us continue with his next point.
Secondly, Judaism, with its unsurpassed moral standards, remains a major influence on the citizens of Israel. I say this as a non-Jew.
This is absolutely ridiculous. Just wow. I can't even believe what he's saying right now. I do happen to be organizing and collaborating a full dedicated episode to the topic of anti-Zionist Jews, and I don't really want to blow my load too early on this one, but it's just ridiculous just how he's speaking on behalf of the entire Jewish diaspora, which, by the way, is not completely monolithically on board with Zionism. Actually, on the contrary, for the most part. For this next bit, I've got 4 different Pew Research Center reports that are very interesting and rather telling about the attitudes of Israel from different religious communities. One article states that 1 in 10 US Jews say caring about Israel is an important or essential part of what being Jewish means to them. Now keep in mind, and bear with me, I am going somewhere with this, folks, that this is mostly represented by 66% of the population being conservative, that believe that Israel is an essential part of what being Jewish is. This is just followed by 53% of Orthodox Jews that believe this. And what that basically means is that conservative and Orthodox Jews are the ones who mostly represent this demographic that I'm talking about here. So that doesn't even mean all Jews. It means mostly a minority within a minority within a minority. Yes, let's talk about that for a second. because according to another Pew Research report, Jews in the United States make up 2.4% of all U.S. adults. This heavily contrasts with yet another Pew Research Center report, which states that Christians make up of 63% of the U.S. population in 2021. Now, I want to be transparent here and say that this particular report is actually more focused on the topic of 3 out of 10 people in the United States are now unaffiliated, or rather atheist for lack of a better term, whereas a decade ago, that number of Christians making up of the US population was 75%. So even a decade later, especially now, they still make up the majority here. Okay, so this is where I get to my main point, citing the last Pew Research Center report, being that more white evangelicals than American Jews say God gave Israel to the Jewish people. This is the main point here. I'm going to quote the article directly. Quote, for example, twice as many white evangelical Protestants as Jews say that Israel was given to the Jewish people by God, 82% versus 40%. Some of the discrepancies is attributable to Jews' lowering level of belief in God overall. Virtually all evangelicals say they believe in God, compared to the 72% of Jews. 23% say they do not believe in God, and 5% say they don't know or decline to answer the question. But even Jews who do believe in God are less likely than evangelicals to believe that God gave the land that is now Israel to the Jewish people, 55% versus 82%. End quote. I am going to make that episode happen, whether it be sometime in July or August. I'm gonna make that episode about anti-Zionist Jews happen, because I feel that so many people who are involved in this ethnic cleansing campaign are bastardizing the Jewish name. I have said this before, and I'm going to say this again. Since the attack on October 7th, I've actually gained even more respect for Jews, because Jews are the ones who are speaking the loudest against this genocide. Meanwhile, during the rise of Christian fascism in the United States, the momentum is not reciprocal here. But I digress. I'm gonna bite my tongue for now, because I have plenty to say about Christianity, and I don't want to get far off topic here. But this is holistically to say that what Dick Kemp is saying about Jewish people, especially in this context, is such a fucking stupid thing to fucking say. It is so far removed from everything that he is trying to appeal to here. Let us continue from where he left off with his next point.
Thirdly, the army is composed overwhelmingly of citizen soldiers. Israel's a small country with a small professional army. To fight a war, it depends on its conscripts and its reservists. These are ordinary citizens, from professors to plumbers, called upon to defend their homes. They don't want to be fighting, and they don't want to harm others.
What is interesting is that he is telling a kernel of truth here, no double pun intended, because yeah, the people of Israel don't want to be conscripted into the IDF. We talked about in a previous video how 230 Israeli students who were graduating high school signed an open letter saying that they will refuse the conscription into the IDF to participate in Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign of Palestinians. Let's also talk about the families of the hostages captured by Hamas. In an article published by the Times of Israel in May of 2024, quote, police detained some 30 protesters out of dozens who managed to block Tel Aviv's Ayalon highway after a hostages family forum protest and an anti-government protest converged, the large majority of whom were subsequently released. 3 of those detained were arrested, police said. This is Israeli state news, by the way, saying this. Not that I have any bias in favor of Israeli state news, but this is to show that even Israeli state news is recognizing that they are on the wrong side of history here. Speaking of Israeli state news doing some rather interesting reporting, Haaretz has actually reported an actual Israeli hostage that was freed was met with death threats. Not by Hamas, not by Palestinians, not even by anti-Israeli protesters, but actually by Zionists. In December of 2023, she told Haaretz that she and her mother would discuss the Israeli and Palestinian conflict with the militants. Quote, "We had some deep conversations as well as difficult ones in which they started cursing us. To believe in humanity, in the existence of some good, you have to have conversations." The article does talk about quite a bit of the abuse that not only she, but also 6 other girls went through throughout their time in captivity, but this is to say that it wasn't all 100% bad all of the time. In fact, what was interesting was that a lot of times they did hear each other out while in captivity. And that is the important part here, because following saying all of this, she received death threats. The Israeli teen would go on to say, quote, "Where can one find the space within the laws to deal with such horrific comments from people who live on this same land? Comments like, 'Too bad you returned,' or 'You had it easy in captivity.' It does something," end quote. And yeah, I can imagine that must really fuck with you, to have an entire genocidal war in your name, only for the very people to turn their backs on you when you become inconvenient for the genocidal narrative. On top of that, I want to talk about this specific segment done by Democracy Now!, which was done in the late part of 2023, where they interviewed an 85-year-old woman who was captured by Hamas and thus freed thereafter. Just take a listen to the segment.
We were very hurt by the fact that the IDF did not know where are the scapegoats. They've warned us 3 weeks prior with people who came to the road and burned fields, sent incendiary balloons to burn our fields, and the IDF did not address this seriously. Suddenly, on Saturday morning, when everything was quiet, there was a heavy bombardment of the communities, and with that, the masses infiltrated, blew up the expensive fence, opened the gates of the kibbutz and entered in their masses. It was extremely difficult. I keep having those images in my mind. He's asking, why did you shake the hand of the Hamas terrorist in the visual? They were gentle with us. Our needs were supplied.
אמא שלי אומרת שהם התייחסו אליהם בעדינות וסיפקו את כל הצרכים שלהם. My mom is saying that they treat them kindly and provided for them.
I realize that the translation is a little rough there, but that was her daughter at the end who flew in from London to be able to translate for her. And yeah, that's a drastically different image as opposed to what the IDF has been doing to the Palestinian people since October 7th. And all of this to say is that the British Colonel Dick Kemp is honestly, let's be real here, he doesn't really give a damn about the hostages that have been captured by Hamas in the first place. In fact, all he's really doing is doing dick-sucking and lip service to the nationalistic image that is the Zionist government and Benjamin Netanyahu, which that is what all of this has to do with in the first place, is nationalistic image.
Nowhere was the essential morality and decency of the IDF more evident than in the Gaza war of 2014. If ever there was a purely defensive war, this was it. The war was started by Hamas, the terror organization, designated as such by the US State Department, that runs the Gaza Strip.
The Nakba took place in 1948. The Nakba took place in 1967. Hamas was created in 1987. Of course, it needs to be said for the billionth fucking time that I do not support Hamas. Because of course, for the billionth fucking time, we have to concede to the fucking goddamn sensibilities of Zionist fucking genocidal ass freaks. But to say that Hamas killing people in 2014 was a defensive war erases the entire historical context in which Israel exists in the first place. Yeah, I am a little bit fucking annoyed because this is not the first time I've made this point, not just in this podcast, but on my whole fucking channel, because this is such an easily debunkable point. Anytime Zionists mention that Hamas started the war, like, you can easily just point to the Nakba, which is the easiest checkmate in the world because they rely on you not knowing what the Nakba is. If you don't know what the Nakba is, I mean, holy shit, you really need to do your homework. I can imagine that there are some people who have grown up in Zionist families and have never even heard of the Nakba or have been lied to about the Nakba. You seriously need to do your homework on the Nakba and the Naksa respectively. Because if you don't, then you truly do not understand the terms in which Israel exists in the first place.
In the first 6 months of 2014, Hamas launched hundreds of rockets at Israeli civilians. After repeated warnings from Israel to stop, the Israeli Air Force finally conducted precision strikes to halt the rocket fire, and the IDF advanced into Gaza to destroy a network of terror tunnels that Hamas had constructed to attack Israeli communities near the Gaza border. The IDF took extraordinary measures to give Gaza civilians notice of targeted areas, dropping millions of leaflets, broadcasting radio messages, sending texts, and making tens of thousands of phone calls. Let me repeat that. The Israelis called Gazans on their cell phones and told them to leave their residences and move to safety. Never in the history of warfare has an army phoned its enemy and told them where they're going to drop their bombs.
Can you imagine if I, hypothetically, for the record, so I don't get in legal trouble here, I decided to announce or make phone calls to either the White House or the fucking Knesset that I was planning to bomb them? What do you think would be happening? Do you think Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu and their administrations respectively would retreat and go hide somewhere and wait for it all to go away so I can get rid of a few bad apples within their administrations respectively? Again, hypothetical here. Do you understand how stupid what he just said sounds? Israel called Gazans to make sure that they hid from all of the bombs that we were going to drop. That's so fucking moral. You are a fucking moron. A real specific kind of moron. I'm flabbergasted, y'all.
Many IDF missions that could have taken out Hamas military capabilities were aborted to prevent civilian casualties, increasing the risk to Israeli citizens and soldiers. Despite all of this, of course innocent civilians were killed. Every war is chaotic and confusing, and mistakes are frequent.
Okay, I have an easy solution for you. Don't start a war. Don't do the Nakba. Don't do the Naksa. Don't do everything that followed after, which led to the creation of Hamas in the first place. I repeated this several times in previous podcast episodes, but this is exactly why 9/11 happened. Because of the Soviet-Afghan War, with the funding of the Mujahideen guerrillas by the CIA and the MI6. And thus, when there was no Marshall Plan in place to restore the Afghan economy after the Afghani militant guerrillas did the bidding of the United States in their proxy war, Al-Qaeda was formed, and thus 9/11 happened. If anything, it should be considered a lesson for how to not have terrorist attacks on your fucking global hegemony. Like, obviously, no, I don't support Al-Qaeda. Like, duh. Like, why do I even have to clarify that I don't support Al-Qaeda in order to explain to people who are nationalistic fucking bozo brains that imperialism in other fucking nation states to extract their resources and to, by extension, destroy communism or whatever, is only going to bite us in the ass later. That is exactly why 9/11 happened, and it is exactly why October 7th happened. It's not that fucking hard to put 2 and 2 together.
But mistakes are not war crimes.
The ICC is currently investigating Israel. Like, shut your mouth. Shut your bitch-ass mouth, dude.
Hamas, on the other hand, committed war crimes as official government policy.
Oh, and you're saying Israel hasn't? I want to share with you a document that was made by lawforpalestine.org that is a huge document of several statements made by Israeli government officials that express genocidal intent. We will not go through all of the statements because I'd rather you look through it yourself in the description below, but I will highlight a few. On October the 7th, 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu stated, quote, "Gaza is the city of evil. We will turn all the places in which Hamas deploys and hides into ruins. I am telling the people of Gaza, get out of there now. We will act everywhere and with full power." Quote, "It is necessary to make cultural changes in Gaza, such as in Japan and Germany following World War II, unquote. Yeah, considering the fact that the Nuremberg trial did not properly prosecute the Nazi soldiers who fled to Argentina, I don't think that's a statement that Benjamin Netanyahu thinks he's making. Not to mention, Japan lost so many people due to the double bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I don't think he really wants to be making this statement. Well, no, wait, what am I saying? Of course he is. He's a genocidal fucking maniac. And so is the US, who was doing trade deals with the Nazis throughout the Holocaust. What the fuck am I saying? Why am I giving Benjamin Netanyahu the benefit of the doubt here? I shouldn't. And just before we end this part of the podcast episode, I want to highlight Yoav Gallant's statement in terms of civilian harm when it comes to the citizens of Lebanon. Quote, "I am saying here to the citizens of Lebanon, I already see the citizens in Gaza walking with white flags along the coast. If Hezbollah makes mistakes of this kind, the ones who will pay the price are first of all the citizens of Lebanon. What we are doing in Gaza, we know how to do it in Beirut." Wait a minute. What was that earlier part where Dick Kemp said something about mistakes being war crimes? On November 17, 2023, Benjamin Netanyahu stated, "You know what? I think I'm done. Like, this is clearly a double standard, and I'm dealing with irrational people here. We are dealing with irrational people here. Benjamin Netanyahu complaining about Biden not giving weapons to the IDF, withholding weapons from the IDF, is a completely irrational person. And I don't think that we should be taking them seriously on a logical level. Instead, we should be treating them like serial killers, which is what they are. They are state-funded, state-mandated, state-enforced, state-permitted serial killers. Not to mention the repeated use of Winston Churchill by Benjamin Netanyahu to justify this genocide is so laughable. I've talked about it in a previous video, which you should all go check out, where Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly uses Winston Churchill as a political prop, but Winston Churchill has been historically anti-Semitic himself, only except for when supporting the rise of the Zionist government of Israel. So I'm not going to elaborate on that here because I feel like I'd be repeating myself, which I've done that a lot already. But like I said, would encourage you all to go check that out. This is so dumb. All of this is so dumb These are rich and powerful people who are some of the most psychopathic in our lifetime.
But mistakes
some of the
are
most
not
dangerous,
war crimes.
some of the most absolutely fucking batshit insane people who genuinely want nothing but more blood and more colonial and imperialist expansion for their hegemonic nation state. And it is absolutely shameful that Biden is the one who is doing the most dick sucking in this situation. I said it before and I'll say it again. Yeah, he is going to cost his own re-election. He is going to get Donald Trump re-elected, for fuck's sake. Like, I can't believe that, dude. Like, not that I want that. Of course I don't want Trump to be elected or to be the president of the United States. But the fact that you've done this much dick sucking for Benjamin Netanyahu on his fucking hands and knees, and by the time he finally tries to pull some restraints, Benjamin Netanyahu pulls his entitled fucking speech about how he needs to finish the job. Oh my god, Biden, you fucked up. And frankly, I'm so fucking done with this government. This is why I'm an anarchist, y'all. The state is illegitimate. Like, we need to abolish the state. Reformation has not worked, and it won't work, and I mean, rest in power, but Aaron Bushnell is correct. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. And I think that we're at a point here to where we should start normalizing the conversation of state abolition. Actual, meaningful, realistic, realizable, tangible state abolition. For real. Like actual state abolition. Not on paper, not in a video game, not in Minecraft, not in theory, not in a zine, not in a BreadTube video, not in a podcast like this one, but a real, actual, foreseeable state abolition. I've done a video on this topic as well, and you all should go check that out, but that is going to be my conclusion here. Is that we are continuing to see the cartoonish nature of these genocidal fucking freaks, and I think until we start moving towards a direction where we actually continue to have discourse and a dialogue on state abolition, we're going to continue to see genocidal fucking freaks making decisions on what to do with our taxpayer dollars and killing people both in and out of our borders. This is not even talking about the actual fucking asylum restrictions that Biden has implemented recently. Goddamn, that is outside of the scope of this podcast episode. I should definitely be doing a podcast episode on that as well. But hey, if you want to hear me talk about ICE and immigration and the southern border, you should follow this podcast and hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow me on Spotify, because I will be talking about those into the future, and I definitely 100% plan to do a video talking about anti-Zionist Judaism and anti-Zionist Jewish activism. These are topics that I feel are not being discussed often enough, and I feel that I have not given them the proper attention on my own platforms, so I will be working on those over time, so just be patient with me. It is something I plan to do. I also do plan to do a part 2 of the I Hate Cowards mini-series of this podcast series, because I really fucking hate cowards. I specifically also want to talk about the people who I find to be courageous, including the student protesters who have actually made some actual change within their efforts to get universities and states and towns to divest from Israel. So I definitely do plan on doing episodes on that topic in the future. This one was just something I wanted to do really quickly because I thought Benjamin Netanyahu said something really fucking stupid, and I just wanted to lambaste on him again because he's a fucking moron with a genocidal streak and a little too much fucking power. So, until next time, comrades, solidarity forever, death to America, smash fascism, death to Zionism, and, most importantly, abolish the motherfucking state and the